And welcome everybody to Artful Tuesdays. That's what I'm going to try and call this. Let me know in the comments if you like this, because we at ARCUK are trying to do a art show every Tuesday at this time, whether live or recorded. So Artful Tuesdays is my idea for a title. You guys in the comments, let us know. Today, I am joined by Shoshana Milgram and Ciccolella, who are regulars at ARCUK and hopefully to be much more regulars at ARCUK. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Kirk. This is exciting.
Yes.
And we are going to be talking about Othello, and particularly not so Othello by Shakespeare, but the wonderful book and lecture series by Dr. Leonard Peikoff, Discovering Great Plays as Literature and as Philosophy. If you guys have not got this book, I recommend it highly. It's wonderful. And the course is wonderful. I had listened to the course several times in the past, and now I'm reading the book.
Okay. May I interrupt?
Yeah,
I
Anne,
know
please.
that the course is on the Ayn Rand Institute page, but it's also on YouTube. So if you just look up Leonard Peikoff plays, I bet you something about it will come up.
Yeah, you could just watch all of them. They're great. And the Q&A, he's always funny. And and Othello is a very interesting one, I think, because it's the one he talked to Ayn Rand about, the only one of this play. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So before we get started with talking about Othello or Shakespeare's Othello and Peikoff's interpretation of it, I wanted to ask Shoshana to give us a little summary synopsis of the play. So whether you've seen the play, read the play or not, I hope you'll stick around for our discussion, because I think it'll still help you. And we're going to give you a summary, Shoshana.
Okay. Well, in some ways, it's a difficult play to summarize because there's a lot of suspense and plotting, but I'll tell you something about it. First thing you need to know is that the drama starts before we even get here. It's sort of like when you watch the TV show and it says previously on 24. Well, previously in Othello land, we've got Othello, and he's the general of the forces of Venice in a war between Venice and Turkey. And he is a good man. He's courageous, he's efficacious, he's dignified, he's noble in character. And Iago is his ensign. And Othello has just passed him over for a promotion, choosing Cassio instead. So that's one thing that happens before we get here, is that Iago was hoping for a promotion and he didn't get it. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Othello, the general, has eloped with Desdemona, the much younger daughter of a Venetian senator. And this is, of course, good news for Othello and Desdemona, but it's bad news for Roderigo, who is a rich and corrupt Venetian who wanted to court Desdemona and whose suit Iago had promised to advance with collecting some profit for that. So no Desdemona for Roderigo, no profit for Iago. So Iago's got a few things on his mind. Then we get here. We open the play with Iago and Roderigo both fuming. And Iago then starts hatching plans to make trouble for everybody except Iago. One plan is to urge Roderigo to let Desdemona's father know that his daughter has eloped. And he thinks that this is going to be trouble for Desdemona and for Othello. But that doesn't work out. Othello serenely explains how he won her heart, and she backs him up. He won her heart with his war stories, which made her admire him and made her wish that she too could be brave and brilliant. So it's a genuine love match, and she's very persuasive on this. So is Othello, and Iago's first plan is a complete failure.
And may I just interrupt? So this is actually a live scene in the play.
Yeah.
Right. So we see that come to pass.
Right. Okay. We see Iago implementing this plan. We see how Othello explains himself and Desdemona backs him up. And, the father is basically persuaded that he does not have a legitimate objection. And Iago, who'd cooked up a plan, doesn't work. He comes up with another plan, and this one is much more insidious. And this occupies much of the rest of the play. His next plan is to set up Othello to distrust and murder Desdemona. And the engine of the plot involves the earlier grudge that he has. He's going to imply that Desdemona has been committing adultery with Cassio the man who was promoted over Iago. So that's going to be trouble for Cassio, trouble for Desdemona, and trouble for Othello. Now you may ask, what does Iago have to gain from any of this? But of course, that's part of the problem. He's into destruction, not into gaining profit for himself. Now his plan, this one, succeeds. He manages to plant in Othello's mind the ridiculous thought that Cassio and Desdemona are involved, committing adultery when this play is moving so fast, there's barely even time for the adultery to happen. But Iago works on it. One of his devices is to make Cassio drunk and to provoke him to behave badly and get fired, and then to have Desdemona intercede for him, which, Cassio's already in trouble. Desdemona interceding for him makes her look suspicious. Another device of Iago's is to get his wife Emilia to bring him a handkerchief Desdemona dropped. And this was a gift from Othello to Desdemona, and then to plant the handkerchief in Cassio's room, leading Othello to believe that she gave Cassio, her alleged lover, Othello's gift. And there's a little more to it than that, but basically he is untiring in trying to arouse suspicion in Othello's mind. Meanwhile, there's a war going on. Well, Othello seesaws between his certain knowledge of Desdemona's love and honesty and the lies that Iago has incepted into his thought. And I say incepted because it almost feels like that movie Inception, where Iago creates pictures and they become almost, images in Othello's mind as if they're reality, as if he has seen them. And Othello thinks that Iago is honest. Iago's wife thinks that Iago is honest. Roderigo thinks he's honest. Cassio thinks he's honest. No one is suspicious. Iago tells a lot of convincing lies. Only to the audience does he speak the truth. So again, weirdly, ironically, terribly, no one is suspicious of Iago. And we aren't suspicious, we know for sure. But Othello has become suspicious of Desdemona. Well, the whole play is full of suspense because it has to move fast. Because at any moment, Othello could have a frank talk with Desdemona, clear things up. Desdemona could protest firmly against Othello's vague accusations. And when he finally eventually tells her about his exact suspicions, she can defend herself against that. At any moment, Desdemona could consult with Emilia about that handkerchief, or Othello could check things out with Cassio, or Emilia could speak up. So all these things are on the verge of happening, but the play moves so fast and they don't. In the end, Othello kills Desdemona, believing her guilty, and with her dying breath, she clears not herself but him, saying that she's taken her own life. Emilia then reveals the facts about the handkerchief, about Iago's plan. Iago kills her in full view of all. And Othello realizes that his judgment was poisoned by Iago and that he has in fact killed the woman who deserved his love. And then as the play ends, he remembers his own past virtue, his own past glory, and his own lost love, and he takes his own life. And that's where the play ends. So I didn't hit every event, but I think that's
very good, Shoshana.
Yeah, and that's the trajectory.
Kirk and I were saying that he's seen the film with Kenneth Branagh and all that. That it doesn't end with Emilia and the handkerchief, and that piece is pulled out, right? So he strangles Desdemona quickly, and he kills himself quickly, and the play's over. So you kind of miss that Emilia Iago conflict.
No, that happens in the Branagh one. There might be another one, but in the Branagh one, the 1995 Othello, Emilia does reveal that the handkerchief was Iago's, and then Iago kills her, stabs her, and then she actually passes out on the bed as she's saying like a song that she had sung.
Oh, the Willow song.
Yeah, the Willow song that's in there. And then Iago's kind of chased around and he's eventually stabbed. And then that's what Othello realizes everything and so on. So that is in there in the Branagh.
It may have just been cut out in a version I saw.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Yeah. Maybe it was a truncated version. That's interesting, like a director's cut. But I saw it on Amazon Prime.
That handkerchief is the handkerchief that Othello got, right, and gave to Desdemona. So Emilia kind of finds it. It's really not her handkerchief, right?
No, it's not Amelia's, but see what happened is that Desdemona dropped it and Amelia picked it up because Iago told her, I want that handkerchief, I want that handkerchief. And so she's trying to please her husband. Oh, I got the handkerchief, here it goes. But she doesn't know its significance. She has no idea. And you see, that's the thing, at any moment,
anything could happen.
Anything could happen. And see, sometimes comedies are built on that at any moment the truth could come out. And, and someone who's being gulled can learn the truth, except that this is a tragedy. And the truth doesn't come out until it's too late. Till it's too late for Othello not to have killed the woman he loves.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's always been mentioned about this play is that it's a tragedy built on a comedy, a romantic comedy in a sense. I don't know if you agree with that, but just the idea of especially the beginning where you have, you have the blocking father, you have someone who, the first two acts is pure love. And I think for this play to work, like when I was watching the Branagh with Lawrence Fishburne, I thought his portrayal, I don't have a lot of, I've read the play several times in my life, but I haven't really seen it performed. So I don't have too much to compare it with, but I thought they did a really good job because he was very calm and collected, and their joy of their love, I really was pretty convinced of. Like they have some scenes of just like, of him just dancing around with her by themselves. And then they have this very tasteful, simple sex scene. And, like it's not over the top, but it's to me, the whole romantic comedy or romance of the beginning was very convincing, which makes it all the more tragic, I think, at the end of the kind of subtle poisoning that Iago gives, and the poison, by the way, as Shoshana mentioned, it's one of the stylistic themes that Shakespeare builds into this over and over and over again. It's the, language of poisoning and I guess enchanting would be another term.
But you're right, Kirk. If you don't have that belief in that love, there's no play, and it's got to happen really fast and really early on. And Dr. Peikoff in his essay talks about how quickly Shakespeare establishes that with poetry.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful because the love is, she's beautiful and he looks fine too. But what actually brought them together was the stories. The true stories that he told about his actual achievements. And it's interesting, he calls her his fair warrior because, well, she can't actually be a soldier, but she says when she heard those stories, she wanted to be a man too. And to live that kind of life, and to achieve great things. And so that's really quite lovely as far as, bringing the two of them together. And again, because there's war going on, they ran away together, and in a way that goes along with the war too. You do things fast. You don't necessarily.
Well, and that is so Ayn Rand, right? The hero worship aspect, the sort of feminine aspect of hero worship is very much Ayn Rand. And these series of lectures are called Discovering Great Plays as Literature and as Philosophy. And Dr. Peikoff is primarily a philosopher, but he really loves theater, and you can really get that throughout this whole thing, even though he thinks this play is very depressing, and he's not a Shakespeare fan per se. He really does appreciate the genius of the language and of the storytelling.
Well, as you said, if you don't believe in the love, you don't care. And even the fact that they ran away together, but because of the war going on, they could not immediately consummate their relationship. And so it's as if that is not going to be conveyed directly on stage, but there needs to be time for that to happen. And there's barely time for them to consummate their relationship. And then afterwards, they're greeted by singing. There doesn't seem to be much time for her to be having any adultery with Cassio. And yet Iago is so vivid in creating it, as indeed he was vivid in creating for Desdemona's father what he wanted him to think about as happening with,
but he's also very clever because he keeps saying to Othello, no, I'm not really thinking about that. No, that can't be true. So Othello keeps asking, well, are you hiding something? Do you know? Have you seen something? So it's brilliantly constructed, the scene with the two of them.
Yeah, no, well, Othello is he keeps calling Iago, he keeps calling him honest. It's as if that's one word, honest Iago, which of course is entirely not the case. And you can kind of see the trouble coming right there, that if he thinks Iago is honest, and we know the Iago not honest, that there's going to be and Iago is resentful, he's destructive, he's nihilistic, and so on. And that Othello, in the goodness of his heart, doesn't see that this is not someone whose judgment can be trusted. And that's, it is sort of like the train wreck that you see happening. You know where we're headed on this, even though there are all these opportunities for an escape. Just speaking the truth.
Yeah, and I think one of the joys of the play that is touching on what both of you are discussing is something we've alluded to, but the style, the language that Shakespeare uses, which often is something that we are reluctant to experience, right? We want the synopsis, we want the cliff notes, but the cliff notes is basically all, like, a lot of the movies and plays that have happened after Shakespeare are kind of like, a lot of them, there's popular ones that are knockoffs of Shakespeare conflicts and ideas and archetypes that he created. But I think his style and his language is really something that sets him apart. So like what you just were talking about, Shoshana, about he's called by Othello honest Iago so much, but there's a ton of language about two-faced, about Janus, the double-faced god of Rome, about, he has this really famous line echoing the Bible, "I am not who I am," and he,
which from our point of view means no identity.
Which means,
right,
from objectivists, you mean like, he has no identity. And I always,
Iago's not Iago.
Yeah, and I think Iago's, since we're limited time, I think Iago's the most interesting character in a lot of ways. And so maybe we could talk a little bit more about him. But what I always take him and like, I am not what I am, but also the way that he builds this, the doubt, and then the conflict inside of Othello, and then eventually building it into an actual imagery of this is not, of this jealousy that you're having that was not in, I think it's not supposed to be in Othello at the beginning. Like, it's something that is literally implanted by him. And so much of this is like, he's trying to, Iago himself is throughout the play trying to figure out, I think to some degree, why he's doing this, right? Like, it almost feels like it's, when his soliloquies, to me, I don't know about you, his soliloquies to me feel like like reflections on like, why am I doing this? Like it's almost like this, I am not who I am, right? Like, I don't know if that's a misinterpretation, but what do you think of that? Like, he's trying to discover why he hates the Moor and why he's doing these things.
I think it's Shakespeare playing with the audience, meaning having, when you do these soliloquies, they really were thought now to be directly to the audience. So I think Shakespeare's playing with that idea of, why is Iago doing this? And every time Iago brings up a reason, the audience is like, well, that doesn't seem like the reason. Mm-hmm. So this is going to bring us to really Ayn Rand's revelation in terms of this lecture.
Which is a super chat we just got by Lisa Van Dam. Hi, Lisa. Thank you for super chatting us. She said, "You all make me want to read this again right now. Do you think of Iago as one of the most evil characters in literature?" That's an interesting one. And I just thought maybe that takes us a little bit out, but I don't know if you guys have a thought on that. The most evil character in literature?
Well, definitely in Shakespeare, right? And I do want to say, if you've never seen this play, on paper, the spelling of his name is Iago. So it looks like I. And
it sounds like ego almost.
Yes,
I think that's what Peikoff points out.
Yes, when you see the play, there are many other evil characters in Shakespeare, but this one, Shoshana, or you use the term nihilistic, and I think that's for sure. What would you say, Shoshana, about world literature? But what would you say about Iago's evil?
Well, I think that, what Leonard Peikoff points out in the lecture, which I think is completely right, is that he corresponds with what Ayn Rand says about envy. Envy is seeking to destroy, to kill without getting anything from it, just dragging something down. And that's Iago. He sees something good, and instead of wanting to take it, he wants to bring it down. Now, what's interesting is that, as you say, he's got these other motives, but they're unsatisfying to the audience. It doesn't really make sense because, oh yeah, he was passed over for promotion, and this is a good way to get his promotion. I don't think so.
And then when he gets promoted, he doesn't
of all the
even
things to
mention it.
do, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't enjoy it. He's, it's well, I think I'm sure you remember, Tui in the Fountainhead. He doesn't want to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to be happy. That's
so
not
people, Ayn Rand fans may know that expression, hatred of the good for being good. And that is one of the reasons why I think Ayn Rand really was interested in this play, because she saw that in the Iago character. And Leonard, that's the core, I think, of Dr. Peikoff's lecture.
And, and I mean, if you go over to Atlas Shrugged, you've got the character of James Taggart, and who breaks down when he realizes that regardless of the consequences to him, he wants to destroy.
So Iago has been one of the more fascinating characters, in literature, and one of the more talked about, written about, characters in literature. I would assume from my little reading, and I'm sure you too can, say yay or nay to that. And so I wanted to get into a little bit of the unique interpretations that Rand and Peikoff in particular, like I said at the beginning, he spoke to Rand about this, but he also, I think, brings his own unique interpretations from objectivism, from his knowledge of objectivism as a literary an analytical tool. And so he brings up what I had always read about before this, about Coleridge's motiveless malignancy phrase, right? That is probably one of the more common, when I've taken a course on this, and that's the one that most people will bring up, that's professors will talk about, is that he's basically just this malignancy that's motiveless. And Peikoff points out, where this is correct, and here he puts this in our chapter here, all of the alleged motives that he gives are like that. They are casual, spur of the moment, unreal. And, so when he does give reasons, Iago, and he gives like 5 or 6, like Shoshana was pointing out, career, maybe he loves, this person, maybe he's jealous, there's several different reasons that he gives, but then they kind of go away. And I just have to point this out, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And this is why it's so easy to just, be underappreciative of Peikoff, but this is brilliant, I think. I'm going to read 3 sentences from him in here in a comparison that he makes here. It is exactly like the arguments you hear against capitalism. You refute one and they come up with 3 more. Then they drop them under pressure and move on to the next. And that, when I read that, and I was like thinking about Iago, and Iago is such a great embodiment of that process of rationalization, of coming up with rationalizations. And if I could say one last thing, I was just reading a tweet by Elon Musk that 2 days, or I think it was a day or 2 ago, where he said, for those curious, I'm going to be $11 billion. I'm going to give $11 billion, or pay $11 billion in taxes. And I was reading through some of the comments, and and the main comments, a lot of them were, well, if I had $300 billion, I would pay more than that to taxes, or if you have $300 billion in taxes. And the point is, like, no matter what you say, like, people argue that you don't pay enough taxes, or no matter what, whatever a capitalist might say, it doesn't matter what argument you give. The people who hate capitalism are going to come up with different arguments. And the same thing with Othello. And to me, it's such a great observation of a real human being that we all meet all the time in real life, that, it's just a great observation. I'm going to stop there and get your thoughts.
Well, I think that part of the difference is that he doesn't have values of his own. And that's why it's so powerful within the play, that Othello has a few values that he really cares about, and that's why it's so upsetting to him when he comes to believe that Desdemona is compromised, because he loved her so much and he keeps coming back to it. And then he sees her, and how can this wonderful person whom I love also be this horrible person that Iago has made me believe in? I mean, that's really, well, remember what he says? He says something terrible. He says, I'm going to chop her into messes.
That's right.
That's not even normal war killing. You just war killing, you just have to kill the person, but he's going to utterly destroy her because he can't bear to see, the compromising, the destruction, the disintegration, the dilution of a value that matters so much. Do you know what he says? You're mentioning the language. One of my favorite bits in here is when he says, "Oh, well, if Desdemona is guilty, chaos is come again. Everything falls apart. I've got no world. I can't go on." And well, the thing is, if Desdemona is guilty, chopping her into messes isn't going to make that go away. But that's the closest. It's a crazy thing to do, but it's as if he's got to.
It's his fury.
He's got to rub that out.
He's
got to rub that out. He can't live with that.
Well, in all of Shakespeare's plays, that idea of imbalance, and it can be in comedy or in tragedy, but of creating a chaotic situation where the world is not in hierarchical order, that's what the plays are moving toward fixing, right? So that's a wonderful quote, Shoshana. And I guess I want to say to people, I know that Shakespeare is hard to listen to. I know that it's not something that you easily can understand what's being said, but I really think after 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, your brain starts to put things together, especially if you do what you said, Kirk, sort of know the framework, know what you're listening for, or know what you're reading for. And I also want to say regarding reading Shakespeare, reading it out loud or reading it along with a video, I mean, I think that's all really helpful. There is one book of Shakespeare that I have to dissuade everybody from getting, and it's the one called No Fear, Shakespeare.
Oh, okay.
Because it has a lot of wrong stuff in it. It has a lot of, this is what this word means. That's not what it means. And it's sort of known for that. So I want to say the Folger Shakespeare, which has facing pages with a glossary and it has illustrations. That's a great one. But there are lots of, you read Norton. There are lots of good Shakespeare
so far. Although the introductory, which one is that?
That's Penguin.
Okay,
the Penguin? Okay.
It's got good notes.
It's got facing. I think that facing page thing really makes it easy, and that Penguin has it too.
Well, I'll just say the same. I think we said the same thing in the first one of these videos, that Peikoff makes a really good point that about, he calls it the modernocentric fallacy or something like that, that I just love his terminology. And, he gives the example of, if Atlas Shrugged, if we read it 2,000 years from now, there'd have to be footnotes, or 500 years from now, there'd have to be footnotes. So what are you not going to experience, Atlas Shrugged 500 years from now, just because there might have to be some footnotes or whatever. And so it's the same thing. This is great aesthetic art. And so it's worth experiencing, even though there's going to be some footnotes and some,
Well, and I wanted to encourage our listeners to just think about, there may be another Shakespeare that you'd like to explore. You'd like to explore Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet, but whatever appeals to you, the experience of Shakespeare is extremely passionate. So whether it's
especially
much
once
ado
you get
about
into
nothing or these, Dr. Peikoff himself said he would get really depressed when he taught Othello because he went there.
Yeah.
He
and
lived
that takes some
play.
practice, but it's worth the work for sure. So, and a lot of that is in the language, and just as one, because I wanted to get to two last things. If we, I think we have some time for it, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the one of the famous soliloquies by Iago, "Put money in thy purse," and what it means and why. Again, as an example of the wonderful style that brings out these wider themes that we've been talking about, that he's talking about, and also I think some of the ways that Shakespeare he has some maybe bad philosophy that is kind of in, putting this in there. But Shoshana, you look like you had something to say when I mentioned that. I was just curious what that was.
Oh, I was just noticing that verbally, the way it works is that he just keeps saying it. He repeats it. Mm-hmm. Now, in general, when you hear people repeating something, it tends to mean that they don't think they were heard the first, second, third, and fourth time. And so it's interesting because it's almost as if it's so clear in his mind, but he wants to say it. And it's sort of the way that Othello, when he's going after Desdemona and what happened to the handkerchief, she's talking away and so on. And he says, the handkerchief, the handkerchief, the handkerchief, the handkerchief. And it's sort of, Othello, which you can see his point of view. And, Desdemona could have told him what actually happened, and then we'd have much shorter play. I'm just saying, I dropped it. I had it, but of course he's telling the whole story and the Egyptian and so on, and he keeps saying, "Now, where's that handkerchief? Where's that handkerchief?" Yeah. So when Iago's talking about put money in my purse, it reminds me of that. Both of them have the feeling that they're not quite being heard, and that's why they keep repeating themselves. That was just my thought.
I never thought of that. That's really interesting.
I think Shakespeare loves parallel structure.
Yeah.
And sometimes it becomes like in music when you have an obligato line, a line that's sort of repeated underneath. You'll hear that in Shakespeare plays. And it's really exciting because he's so rhythmic, right? We know that the poetry has a particular rhythm, but also Shakespeare, in terms of images, has particular rhythms that he'll repeat.
Yeah. And again, this is just kind of the point of all the wonders of the language. Just, some examples, because it plays on so many levels. This is why I think reading the language itself is so important, because it plays on the characterization of Iago. It plays on his, how we interpret him and his philosophy, what he thinks. And then it also plays on what he's trying to accomplish plot-wise in a given moment. So put money in thy purse is something that he's not just saying as a soliloquy, he's telling it to Rodrigo, who Rodrigo, as Shoshana mentioned in the synopsis at the beginning, is somebody who is in love with Desdemona and
in lust with. Thank
you. And that is important because he even Iago recognizes that, and he basically plays on that. The first line is he's talking about her, Desdemona, and he's saying that she's in lust. And he's basically building this argument, I think, that everything's about lust, really. It's all lust, which speaks to Rodrigo, right? Like that's what Rodrigo is. He's a man of lust, and Iago speaks to him in his language. And he says it is merely a lust of the blood and a permission of the will. That's what he says about her regarding the Moor. And he says of the Moor, these Moors are changeable in their wills. Fill thy purse with money. The food that to him now is as luscious as locusts, shall be to him shortly as bitter as colon quintida. It's it says it in here. It's some kind of like colon cleansing herb or something like that. And he has a lot of that, stomach, which, by the way, again, it just shows the view that Iago has. If he even has a view like that, that's always the question, is is it just a tool for him to manipulate Rodrigo to accomplish what he wants him to accomplish, which is to mess up mess up Othello, Desdemona, like this web, as he keeps putting it, of ensnaring all of them in this horrific web.
Well, that for me is the compelling image in the play. I did do the play. That picture that we've used to promote is a picture that we put together from our production of Othello, but we also had some projections. So some of the play we had take place in a garden, and we'd have a projection of a branch and a flower, and we'd have a spider really, really slowly moving along that branch to that flower. So you might not even notice it in the audience, but I just love the idea that Iago is the spider.
Yeah, he's a spider. He is, again, all the metaphors and imagery. He uses the example of the will as you as a gardener of your own self, and so you make what you want of your own self. But then I don't even know if he really believes that. He's such an endlessly fascinating villain in a very negative sense of why. I think the other thing Coleridge said about it is like a motive hunt. Like you're hunting for what is his motive, and it ends up being motiveless malignancy type thing. So I had one other thing I wanted to talk about, but did you guys have any last things to talk in terms of interpretations, and particularly with Peikoff? And I just wanted to see if you had any other thoughts on the play.
Huge fan of these lectures, and thank you for doing it. And I'm just thrilled that more people are, thinking about Dr. Peikoff's lectures. There are 2 errors in this lecture. Factual errors from Dr. Peikoff. One is, what fools these mortals be? Not Ariel, not the Tempest, Puck, Midsummer. Yeah. The other is, Iago doesn't have more lines than Hamlet.
Yeah, no.
A few other people. So
I caught that one.
Oh, Hamlet. Now Iago has a lot of lines, and many more than Othello. But I had to confess and put those in. But I think this, if you're interested at all in learning more about Shakespeare, and if you want to take a bite at this, it's, as I said, it's on YouTube, and it's just a really great piece to listen to.
Well, I would say that when one speaks in a lecture, sometimes it's not the same thing as writing. And so I'm just saying that, if errors happen, but as long as we're mentioning them, he says something about this play being in Middle English, and Middle English, that's Chaucer, and Chaucer's a lot harder to make your way through. This is well, I mean, you can do it, and it's great.
It's possible, but
to read Chaucer in Middle English.
We now talk about it as early modern is the way we would talk about it.
Right.
Thank you, Shoshana. You're absolutely right. When you're giving a lecture, it's all
and they're not essential mistakes, to be clear. They're minor, just off the top of the head type things that he just messed up a thing or two. Now, in terms of the interpretation, so the common one, and the one that I want to, the last one I hope to point out that he talks about in Discovering Great Plays is the confusion that anybody who's not an objectivist is going to have regarding egoism, right? And why, and he makes a point about the importance of philosophy in studying the classics. So like even in the in this Norton translation, for instance, the essay at the beginning, well, I didn't like the essay at the beginning of this one. Some of them were okay, but just because they focused so much on race and they made it all about racism, essentially, that seemed to be, and that is relevant. His race is very relevant. But sometimes I think modern literary critics, I don't know, make a molehill out of an anthill or whatever. Like, I can't remember that phrase.
Mountain out of a molehill.
No, out of a molehill. Thank you. But anyway, what he says here, Peikoff, is he talks about A.C. Bradley, the Shakespearean interpreter, and he says that, quote, "In intellect and in will, Iago is great. To what end does he use these great powers? His creed, for he is no skeptic, he has a definite creed, is that absolute egoism is the only rational and proper attitude, and that conscience or honor or any kind of regard for others is an absurdity." And what Peikoff's point is that that's not correct about his egoism. And when you have an understanding of Ayn Rand's unique perspective on egoism, that I think goes away. And one of the ways that I've seen this come out in the text is all the personal interest that Iago is supposed to have. And they'll even put this in the side notes. They'll translate something like "my peculiar end," his personal interest. That's what it says in the side note of the Norton anthology. And I was thinking of what's that his personal interest? Because he ends up dead. It didn't really do well for him. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tortured, not necessarily dead.
Okay.
He's stabbed, and he's probably going to be tortured, until the whole thing. But basically, he says, "I'm not going to talk anymore," and I think that's why he's going to be tortured, because they want to get the whole story from him.
Okay.
But he's not actually dead at the end.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I'm thinking of the Branagh conclusion movie. You're right. But in the play, I think because in the Branagh, he's definitely dead. So this is why interpretation, he's lying down on the thing and he with the two bodies, so he looks dead. But yeah, I think this is why interpretation and staging is so important. Is like, but yeah, and he says like, I'm not going to speak another word, right? And then that's the last word he says, I believe, in the play. Yeah. Anyway, but my point is, bad things happen to Iago, so it's not really in his personal interest. If he had his long-term personal interest from an objectivist standpoint in view, he would not do any of these things. He would, obviously act more rationally. So I just wanted to point out the, like interpretation. We're all affected by, literary interpretation, whether when we analyze things, whether we realize it or not, especially of classics. And it's so easy to get skewed without, a good philosophy helping to guide you in your interpretation.
And also, I think that's completely right, because, the philosophy gives you a framework for understanding everything in reality, and the play is part of reality. It's also true that you have to read the play with your own eyes.
Thank you. Yep,
and, and sometimes commentaries just wrong. And so you need to look at the play and see what the writer put there. And I think that with Shakespeare, it's such a privilege because we haven't quoted him enough, but I mean, it's almost as if he taught the language how to talk. And the joke is that Shakespeare's full of quotations. You read Shakespeare and you see things that you've seen elsewhere, but it's as if he knew how to pick all the right words. And then we remembered how to say, Othello, farewell the tranquil mind. It's when, can you imagine saying that? Farewell the tranquil mind. And
that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I say, like, for me, the joy is in meshing myself in the language, especially since I haven't seen a lot of the.
And this is, when language was being born, right? So a lot of the reasons why we have all these quotes is because language was really happening at this time. So it's exciting. And I honestly like to read commentary and have my own dialogue with it.
Yeah.
It puts other thoughts in my mind and I respond to it in a different way and so on. So this is all great.
Well, we're commentators, and I think I have useful things to say. But you need to read the play. You need to have your firsthand encounter with the work of art, and then you're in a position to see whether other things can help you enhance your understanding and appreciate it more. But I'm glad you mentioned that about the language, because this is right around the time this is Queen Elizabeth, and then comes King James. And what do we know about King James? One good thing. Bible. Okay. and boy, is that one full of quotations.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, it's a kind of dignified, well, if Shakespeare had written it, would have been better, but still it's just saying,
he wasn't very religious. One of the things I like about him.
No.
Yeah.
So Kirk, you're going to tell us about Clubhouse?
Yeah. So I think after this, we'll wrap up our conversation here. If anybody would like to join us on Clubhouse, I just want to, again, make a pitch that we didn't cover so much. I'm going to tease you guys, and maybe we could talk about this in Clubhouse. Peikoff quotes Rand a bit in here, or quotes a conversation he had with Rand, because he was going to teach Othello years and years ago, obviously before the lecture. And she had the greatest, again, like, Ayn Rand does not pull punches. She's so bold in the things she says, and only, like, if someone were to, like, write, this is what this, or some writer said this about Shakespeare, I'd be like, oh, that's Rand who said that. Like, just by this, like, she says, Shakespeare is a special kind of moralist, a psychopathic moralist. And it's, we could talk about what she meant by that, by psychopathic moralist, or what Peikoff says about it. But I just find that whether you agree with it or not, it's not as irrelevant. It's just like, that's quintessential.
It's bold.
It's so bold. Yeah. Which I love. Yeah. I love the bold.
And she comments on Othello in here as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And in Ayn Rand Answers. So, it's a play that comes
impactful
up.
Play. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So I guess with that note, if you join us with Clubhouse, maybe we could talk a little bit more about that and other things. And thank you very much. Thank you, Shoshana. Thank you, Anne. And I hope to talk to you too soon. Well, I'll talk to you at Clubhouse.
Thank you, Kirk.